G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here, with part 3 of a book review of Bill Gammage's The Biggest Estate on Earth, published by Allen and Unwin, 2011, in hardback. ISBN 978-174237-7483. We've looked at the illustrations of Australia before it was modified by Europeans. We've talked about religion in the sense of the dreaming. Well, that's a part of it. In part 3, I'd like to have a look at the Aboriginal idea of country, which is particularly crucial to understanding how things were and how things are in what's left of the biggest estate on earth. As a result of the policy of terra nullius and the colonial administration and the Federation of Australia. Country. The dreaming taught why the world must be maintained. The land taught how. Well, I was going to try and point the camera at a wallaby for this next section, but the wallaby hopped away. So, instead of that, you can have a skyscape over the trees. The dreaming taught why the world must be maintained, the land taught how. One made land care compulsory, the other made it rewarding. One was spiritual and universal, the other practical and local. Songlines distributed the land spiritually, country distributed it geographically. Everybody had a country, narrowly defined, land, water and their sites, and knowledge in the care of a family under its head. A family was a man, perhaps his brothers and their wives, relatives and descendants, though some moved out on marriage and others moved in or out as suited. Quote, "The inhabitants of these wilds must be very few," Oxley decided. "Their deserted fires and camps which we occasionally saw never appeared to have been occupied by more than 6 or 8 persons. In their country, a family saw an environment shaped in the dreaming and thronged with sights and stories, witnessed the familiarity of plants, creatures and elements, had with particular localities and thought itself part of these intimacies. Not only obvious features which Europeans name, but every pebble and ripple disclosed both the ecological logic of its existence and the dreaming's presence. Here wallaby and wallaby ancestor live, there Nardoo and Nardoo ancestor. There avenging fire killed lawbreakers, here a punishing flood reached. Totem site and ecological niche alike prove the need and reward in caring for country. Some places might not be touched for years, but not for a moment did carers forget them. Each country was surrounded by other countries, so that across the continent and into the sea there is a network of countries. No country is ruled by any other, and no country can live without the others. It follows that no country is centre toward which other countries must orient themselves, and equally that each is its own centre. Countries formed a national continuum. To ensure this, qualified others might mediate to adjust a country if human populations fluctuated too much. At least in the north, specialist managers advised on fire, and neighbouring elders had a working knowledge of a country and its stories, and dropped hints if they felt it needed care. The illiterate habit of fixing boundaries imposes an illusory rigidity on 1788. Spirits or totems limited where someone could go, but generally the boundaries of the country were permeable. Almost everyone had rights and interests in other countries. At New Norcia, Western Australia, each family regards one particular district as belonging exclusively to itself, though the use of it is freely shared by nearby friendly families. Core territory lay amid zones open according to kin, totem, clan, neighbour, trading partner or occasion. Within a family, one member might have access rights denied another, yet neighbours came to each other's assistance. The tribal boundary may not be crossed over without permission, but if conditions become dry within one tribal area, it is customary to offer one's tribal neighbours a section of country for hunting or a lake on which to fish. People helped neighbours or kin fleeing war, initiating children, or tackling big projects like fish and game drives or clean-up fires, and came hundreds of kilometres for seasonal harvests of bogong, bunya, cycad, eel and their associated ceremonies. In these ways, rights to country was spread, but like the magic pudding, never reduced. The right to say who could enter country was the decisive expression of legitimate possession. No individual of any neighbouring tribe or family can hunt or walk over the property of another without permission of the head of the family owning the land. A stranger found trespassing can legally be put to death. James Dawson wrote of Western Victoria in 1881. In northwest Australia, no tribe used another's land except by invitation. Each has its own district in which it reigns supreme. Such district is again subdivided into portions belonging to the individuals of that tribe. The children inherit and females share equally with the males in the distribution of landed property. John Brown stated of Albany people, that's West Australia, it is difficult to say what the rights of ownership consist. Members of the tribe hunt indiscriminately over each other's ground, yet should an enemy or one of another tribe wilfully trespass on these grounds, such a liberty would be immediately noticed and would in all probability lead to acts of violence and retaliation on both sides. Around Bunbury, West Australia in 1841, each family had a more or less defined area of country belonging to it, a kind of heritage. Its rights over such tract were respected and any infringements regarded in the light of trespass. Even if an individual of the same tribe, yet of a different family, had occasion to traverse it, he would only, if obliged at all, take just enough to appease his hunger, example, one bird or one egg from a nest, leaving the remainder for its rightful owners. And it was wonderful to note how each knew exactly what was on their piece of land. They were never selfish about its products, but during the superabundance of any food plants, game, fish, etc., at any particular season, would send round for neighbouring families to come and make common property of what nature had so plentifully supplied them. Particular districts are considered generally as being the property and hunting grounds of the tribes who frequent them. These districts are again parcelled out among the individual members of the tribe. Every male has some portion of land of which he can always point out the exact boundaries. These properties are subdivided by a father among his sons during his own lifetime and descend in almost hereditary succession. Tribes can only come into each other's districts by permission or invitation, in which case strangers or visitors are well treated. Especially in the southeast, neighbours named groups by their word for yes or no, the word they used to permit or deny access to country. Eora, bracket Sydney, possibly from Eor, yes, is a post-1788 invention. But at least 15 groups in western New South Wales and northwest Victoria, and at least 6 in New England, and some in southern Queensland were named, presumably by their neighbours, from their word for no. Always ask was and is the rule, strict and universal, even for kin confident of the answer. This was closely guarded. Their wars generally originate in their hunting beyond their limits. A New South Wales squatter remarked in 1841, and east of Perth, George Moore observed, among themselves the ground is parcelled out to individuals and passes by inheritance. The country, formerly of Midgeru, then of his son Yagan, belongs now of right to 2 young lads, bracket brothers, and a son of Yagan. Some trespassers went upon this ground, lighted fires and chased wallabies. This was resented by the young lads, and as it happened there was a large meeting of natives at the time and a general row commenced and no less than 15 were wounded with spears. People felt intensely for their country. It was alive. It could talk, listen, suffer, be refreshed and rejoice. They were on it and others were not because they knew it and it knew them. Where their spirit stayed, there their spirit stayed, there they expected to die. No other country could ever be that. Even as he was dispossessing them, Robinson confessed, "The natives of Van Diemen's Land are patriots, staunch lovers of their country. When an elder could no longer travel easily and death might come, he stayed at a favoured place teaching the country to 2 or 3 attending wives and warriors. Within the boundaries of their own country, as they proudly speak," James Dredge remarked in 1837, "they feel a degree of security and pleasure they can find nowhere else. Here their forefathers lived and roamed and hunted, and here also their ashes rest." Puntut Japa rock shelter in very tough desert south of Warburton, West Australia, was occupied for most of the last 10,000 years, and Richard Gould paid tribute to the Aborigines whose resourcefulness led to the establishment and maintenance of this dignified and rewarding way of life under what were perhaps the most rigorous environmental conditions ever encountered by any historic or prehistoric hunters and gatherers. Country was heart, mind and soul. Country was not property. If anything, it owned. "The above families belong to this ground," John Wedge observed near St Leonard's in Victoria in 1835. A family head might speak of country as his, but only because he had a right and a duty to manage it. He did not own it, for he could not dispose of it. The law decreed who inherited. When Bundall was ordered off government land at the cow pastures near Sydney, he exclaimed, "The government land, well, that's a good joke. It's my land, and was my father's, and father's fathers before me." At Adelaide, Clammer Sherman found that every adult native possesses a district of land which he calls his country and which he inherited from his father. "No English words," Bill Stanner concluded in 1969, "are good enough to give a sense of the links between an Aboriginal group and its homeland. Our word home, warm and suggestive though it be, does not match the Aboriginal word that may mean camp, hearth, country, everlasting home, totem place, life source, spirit centre and much else all in one. Our word land is too spare and meagre. The Aboriginal would speak of earth and use the word in a richly symbolic way to mean his shoulder or his side. When we took what we call land, we took what to them meant hearth, home, the source and locus of life and everlastingness of spirit. At the same time, it left each local band bereft of an essential constant that made their plan and code of living intelligible. Particular pieces of territory, each a homeland, formed part of a set of constants without which no affiliation of any person to any other person, no link in the whole network of relationships, no part of the complex structure of social groups any longer had all its coordinates. The Aborigines faced a kind of vertigo in living. They had no stable base of life, every personal affiliation was lamed, every group structure was put out of kilter, no social network had a point of fixture left. And then they became full citizens of Australia. They were given social security and the right to buy alcohol. So, in the ruins of a war-ravaged land, they were allowed to get drunk. That last little comment was from me, not from the book. People cared for and took life from country. Possession was duty, making them life curators in two senses. Bound for life to keep country alive. They were bound to all their country, not just its best parts. Eyre observed, "No part of the country is so utterly worthless as not to have attractions sufficient occasionally to tempt the wandering savage. Into its recesses, in the arid, barren, naked plains of the north, with not a shrub to shelter him from the heat, not a stick to burn for his fire except what he carried with him, the native is found." He added, "There are no localities on Australia's coast, no recesses in its interior, however sterile and inhospitable they may appear to the traveller, that do not hold out some inducements to the bordering savage to visit them, or at the proper seasons of the year provide him with the means of sustenance. In Victoria, rather than forego the pleasures of a change of scene, the horde will break up its encampment among an abundance of game and remove to a site where all their address in hunting can scarcely satisfy their wants. Between Berrima and Albury, New South Wales, wherever place we have been in, Whether on the top of the highest mountain or in any of the deepest ravines, we always find evident marks that the natives occasionally resort to them, although there does not appear to be any inducement to visit these secluded places. Sooner or later, people patrolled every corner, burning, balancing, refreshing. Arnhem Land is classified country as accurately as any ecologist, and they are able to state without hesitation what food supply, animal and vegetable, each association will yield. The accuracy with which an Arnhem Land hunter could name and give an association according to its botanical composition and the food supply, woods for spears and other purposes, as well as resins and fibre plants, what it would yield at any season of the year was astonishing. It showed that these natives are far from the shiftless and improvident people of popular report. Walking in and in camp, before birth and at play, teaching never ceased. As with totem links, it lumped rather than split. The child is taught from a holistic point of view, and the example used is a tree. She is taught everything there is to know about the existence of that tree. When it blooms, the insects that live in its branches and bark, the birds and animals that use that type of tree only for food and shelter, what certain parts of the tree can be used for food or healing. Then he or she is taught about the surrounding vegetation, landscape, geology and climate. This method teaches the child about symbiosis and how significant the relationship of one thing is to another, so as to gain a complete understanding of each of the organisms within the whole picture. Ecological knowledge was unavoidably local. Season and circumstance compelled local adjustments, while plants and animals changed over the life cycles, eddies in place as well as time. People expected help from ancestors and totems, but help hinged on knowing country. What they knew decided how well they lived, sometimes whether they lived. The main technology for the organisation of country, Debbie Rose wrote, is and was knowledge. Knowledge is country specific, and virtually the whole body of knowledge for any given country is related to the generation of life in and around that country. Countries are interdependent, so it is not the case that one person's knowledge is restricted only to one country, or that countries are self-sufficient in their knowledge. But it is the case that each country has its own specificities, the knowledge of which belongs to some people and not to others. Eyre illustrated this. Another very great advantage on the part of the natives is the intimate knowledge they have of every nook and corner of the country they inhabit. Does a shower of rain fall, they know the very rock where a little water is most likely to be collected, the very hole where it is the longest retained. Are there heavy dews at night, they know where the longest grass grows from which they may collect the spangles, and water is sometimes procured thus in very great abundance. Should there be neither rains nor dews, their experience at once points out to them the lowest levels where the gum scrub grows, and where they are sure of getting water from its roots with the least possible amount of labour that the method admits of, and with the surest prospect of success. Strello reported, my guide Lilit Jerkaba, when taking me across the southern Pintuby area, where most of the waters were either deep holes in the ground or clefts in sunken boulders scattered in the mulga thickets, located these difficult sites with astounding precision. We would often travel blind through thick mulga scrub for several hours and then halt suddenly before a soak or a rock plate invisible even from a distance of 50 yards. Local detail let people predict what animals would do and when. They forged alliances, most obviously with dogs, and most famously with killer whales or porpoises on the east coast. In Moreton Bay, Queensland, Roger Ferry watched as men crowded to the beach, all armed with spears, and watched with intense interest a shoal of porpoises tumbling and rolling from the Pacific toward the bay. The sight of these porpoises is always an occasion of joy to these poor people. They regard the porpoises as their best friends and never allow them to be caught or injured. They even know and recognise some of them by name. Foster Evans saw people fishing in consort with porpoises along the shore. It was amusingly agreeable to see the natives working, spearing the fish driven towards the shore, and the porpoises devouring what escaped from the natives or was driven back by them. The very best of terms existed. The porpoise appeared in no fear by the approach of a native so close as 4 or 5 yards, neither did their yelling and shouting in the least alarm them. Tinker Campbell was more precise. Here, for the first time, I saw the blacks fishing. There were many hundreds along the beach with their tow rows (nets) in hand. As soon as the shoal of fish appeared in the offing, some 2 or 3 of the blacks would advance to the water's edge and, striking the water with their spears as a signal to the porpoises to drive the fish into the bank, which signal the porpoises would instantly obey. The main body of blacks, some hundreds in number, would rush in with their tow rows and dip up the fish. The blacks even pretend to own particular porpoises, and nothing will offend them more than to attempt to injure one of their porpoises. So, even in plenty, people reserved sanctuaries and imposed bans to counter scarcity. This is strikingly provident. Most societies today, including people who call Aborigines improvident, can't do it. Supporting fewer people than possible is a key feature of 1788. It made resources abundant. Abundance was thus a precaution, but normal. People usually satisfied their material wants quickly, with less toil than all but privileged Europeans in 1788. It helped that they ate almost everything. Many more foods than Europeans ate, perhaps a greater variety than any society on earth in 1788. Yet they ate nothing to scarcity or even short of plenty, and they could afford food to host ceremonies for hundreds of guests, sometimes for months. Newcomers commented endlessly on plains rich with life, skies dark with birds, seas black with fish. In Tasmania, Hardwick reports places where kangaroo are very numerous and easily caught and in great abundance. From St Valentine's Peak, Hellier saw kangaroos in abundance and tracks of them in all directions. Throughout a bushwalk near Goulburn one night in 1832, Govett heard possums grunting and saw glider possums flying. E.P.S. Sturt thought the Murrumbidgee in 1837 most beautiful. Every creek abounded with wild fowl, and the quail sprung from the long kangaroo grass which waved to the very flaps of the saddle. And in the 1870s, station hands could tickle fish from the river by hand and shoot possums without leaving camp. It is no wonder the blacks were well conditioned, Alexander Lissouf wrote near Swan Hill, Victoria in the late 1840s. For no native tribes could gain their living more easily, as their river was full of fish and the country abounded in game, while quantities of small yams were obtained on the river flats, and at the root of one of the large bushes was edible. Near Bairnsdale, Victoria, Angus McMillan saw a lake alive with swans, ducks and pelicans. On the north side of the lake the country consists of open forest, and the grass was up to our stirrupines as we rode along. The country was absolutely swarming with kangaroos and emus. I've always found the greatest abundance in their huts, Gray concluded. So, that's part 3 of the book reading. I think now you should go out and buy yourselves a copy, as I plan to do, because this one is borrowed. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.